I just wanted to take some time to explain why I'm running 30 miles for my 30th birthday and kind of talk about all the training I've done up to this point. So for a long time, I've wanted to run a marathon, which is 26 miles, which is actually 4 miles less than our goal of 30 miles. Growing up, I played sports. I played basketball throughout high school. I started lifting weights regularly in college, and then for the past 2.5 years, I've been certified as a personal trainer. But even though I've always been relatively active, endurance training has never been something I enjoyed or I look forward to. So for example, for basketball in high school, sometimes we have to do conditioning. Sometimes some of that conditioning were, at the time, longer runs. Runs that probably I wouldn't consider very long now, but at the time were longer runs. And I just never enjoyed it. I never looked forward to it. So as far as actually doing a marathon, even though I was always relatively active, I feel like that's why I feel like that's why it took me so long to do something like this. But then we kind of backtracked 9 months ago, back to March of 2020, and California issued its stay-at-home order, its first stay-at-home order, in response to the current pandemic. Here in San Diego, at least, what that meant was you weren't supposed to leave your residence unless you were an essential worker or a frontliner. Like if you work at a hospital, or if you're a first responder, or if you work at the grocery store. And I'm sure I'm missing a few. Back in March, you couldn't leave your house unless you're going to work for one of those fields, or if you were leaving to buy groceries, which they recommended you only did every so often, and when you went to stock up to avoid having to go back so often. As part of the stay-at-home order here in San Diego, at least, I'm not sure about other parts of California or other parts of the country, we were still allowed to go outside to exercise. I know I observed it. I'm sure a lot of people here observed it, but it was pretty interesting because you just saw a lot more people outside going on walks or jogs or runs than I've ever been. So I'm turning 30, right? So I've seen more people being active outside than I have seen in my entire 29 years up to this point. And I think that's a couple things, right? I think that's one, the stay-at-home order allowed us to go outside for a little bit if we're exercising. So one, I think it was an excuse to get outside. I think two, just kind of general health, right? Health and well-being. With the gyms closed, it became the new format of training for a lot of people, was to get outside and to get active. And then three, kind of related to general health and well-being, being active, is of course to boost that circulorespiratory system against COVID-19. So I'm no different. So starting last year, I kind of made it a point to start running at least once a week, or at least once every 2 weeks. So even last year, I was already running like 5 miles once a week or once every 2 weeks. And that was just because I feel like I'm getting older and I needed to incorporate more endurance training into kind of my training program for whatever that meant at the time. So even before this year, I was already running a distance of 5 miles at least once a week, every 2 weeks. I recently moved literally last week, but at the time I was living in downtown San Diego, which is actually just a few miles away still. But I was just finding myself, one, I was getting out there for the reasons I already stated, but being downtown, I just started taking different routes and different paths each time I was out there to get some exercise. And sooner or later, I think in the beginning it was just, a mile or two every day. Cause yeah, instead of just being once a week or once every 2 weeks, it became an everyday thing. I found myself going on a jog or a run every day. And at first it was just a mile, a couple miles, so I wouldn't get burned out, so I could sustain it, so I could do it every day. But living in downtown San Diego, it was just so interesting to kind of discover the city on my feet. So just kind of naturally, my routes got longer and longer, and I was jogging, running for longer distances and having to take less and less breaks. So kind of naturally, in response to the pandemic, I just started running a lot more. So within the past 9 months, I've done 15 half marathon distances, so at least 13.1 miles or more. And then of those 15 half marathons, 7 of those have been 24 plus miles, which is funny now that I look back at it. I wish I had just ran, a few more miles or a couple more miles, so I could say I've ran 7 or so marathons, which is 26.2 miles. But the way I had a loop I was doing at the time that kind of started at my place. I went around downtown San Diego through Point Loma, cut back through Liberty Station, and then around the airport back to my place. And that was just a little over 24 miles, and that was my route. So the route itself didn't allow for the full 26.2 marathon length distance. So I've ran 15 half marathon distances, 13.1 miles. Of those 15, 7 have been 24 plus miles. And of those 7, one of them have been at least a marathon distance. I think I did something different that day where I ran a little bit more. And then, so I think my longest single session was 26.4 miles, which is 0.2 miles over a full marathon. So you kind of fast forward to now, or not even to now, maybe a couple months ago, and I just started thinking about my birthday. Also, just kind of thinking about the progression of the current pandemic, and if we were even going to be able to celebrate in maybe a way that I would want to celebrate if we weren't in a pandemic. I was just kind of thinking, we'll probably still be in a pandemic. What can I do to still make my 30th birthday memorable, or do something to add on to whatever small plans we make, right? And also just kind of naturally, it just came to me like I should probably just run 30 miles for my 30th. At the time, and even now, I think it just sounds cool, 30 for 30. But even a couple months ago, I already felt ready, just because, kind of circling back to what we talked about, at the time I'd already run 7 distances of 24 plus miles, the longest one being 26.4 miles. So in my head, it was easy to convince myself that 30 miles is only 4 to 6 more miles. It would be very doable as far as all the training I had kind of coincidentally done up to that point. So the plan on Saturday itself is we're still gonna have a little hangout with a few friends and family, but it's definitely not gonna be as maybe big or whatever it would be if we weren't in a pandemic. I feel like for my 30th, it would have probably been, one, it's not just my birthday, but it's kind of like, that next marking of a decade in my life. So I feel like not only would my close friends and family be there if we weren't in a pandemic, but I would have also invited people I haven't seen in a while, other friends and family, But yeah, so the plan is still to hang out with a few friends and family, have a small gathering. But the run itself is really just for me, It's to, kind of what I mentioned earlier, just to in addition to hanging out with my friends and family. Not that that's not memorable itself, but to make my 30th even more memorable for myself during this pandemic. So as far as physically, I kind of know where I'm at. So recently, so kind of since March, so back in March, I kind of just started running to run, right? Just for the exercise, just an excuse to get outside. But I hadn't really researched how to run smart or efficiently or really train for an endurance sport. I was just kind of getting after it, which I think is important as well, because you build that kind of mental fortitude or strength or whatever you want to call it, when you kind of just get out there and do it with no formal training. I think that's what it builds, right? Some kind of mental, increase your mental capacity in a way. With that said, physically, I know kind of just based off my longer runs, I know when I'm gonna hit that wall. I expect to hit that wall of kind of where my body feels good, and then all of a sudden, my hips start to ache. My body feels like it's drained of energy. I feel like I'm gonna hit whatever wall that is around 18 to 20 miles. That's typically where I hit it. And then, like I mentioned earlier, my runs are usually, my longest runs are usually like 24 plus miles, a little bit over 24 miles. So when I get to that point, I'm able to tell myself it's only 4 to 6 more miles, right? And I think that's when we get into the mental aspect of it. So mentally, I also feel ready. So on previous long runs, when I hit that wall, I've been able to tell myself it's only 4 to 6 more miles. And that's kind of the plan for Saturday as well, right? When I hit that wall, hopefully it's a little bit later than sooner. Hopefully it's a little bit later than 18 to 20 miles. I have been running more, I have been training still. So hopefully that wall hits somewhere from 20 to 24 miles, and I could just kind of convince myself that there's only a few more miles left to go. I think if I had trained smartly, right, I wouldn't be hitting that wall. I would have trained my cadence, I would have trained for heart rate zones. My body would be less prone to building lactic acid as soon, so my lactic threshold would be longer. I just know if I had trained smarter, these wouldn't be issues, right? But it is what it is. We're a few days away from the 30 miler. Once I hit that wall, I think it's just important to remind myself that it's gonna end. Even if it ends hours later, even if I have to walk the rest of it, it's gonna end. So it's just temporary. So physically, mentally, that's where I'm at. If you have gotten to this point in the video, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this video and any videos that we've posted so far. We are 3 days out, 30 for 30.